Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So in just a couple of weeks' time, it will be the 5-year anniversary of the very first video I ever uploaded to YouTube. And in that time, I've debunked a great many claims, as you no doubt know, some of which are truly mind-boggling. For example, there was the Mamma Mia article by Eamon Evans that claimed that MRAs go around saying that women are a disease that must be extirpated. Yeah, well, I traced that quote down because you can see that Eamon Evans doesn't have a link to where it came from. So I traced it down and found that that quote actually came from a radical feminist who was saying that about men. This particular quote by the Red Femme had passed through numerous feminist websites and had been magically transformed from something a Red Femme was saying about all men into something that MRAs commonly say about women. Amazing that, really, isn't it? And then there was the article written about me by one Mr. Dana King, a person who claims to have done research into the men's rights movement for a book he's writing. I'm looking forward to that book. And Dana made numerous false claims about the men's rights movement, but the one that really sticks out in my mind is the one that says that apparently American MRAs like Mexican wives because they're more docile. Now, I originally thought this must have come from something said by a pickup artist like Rush V or something on Return of Kings, but not even they said it. So I have no idea where this notion came from. I suspect that Dana King just made it up. You know, probably like most of the other things that will be in his book if he ever gets it published. And then there was the Addicting Info article with the headline, "This female student was murdered on campus and men's rights activists are celebrating." Well, that's a pretty serious claim. Now, if you follow the citations, though, it leads to a Tumblr post by an individual who has no connection to the men's rights movement. So apparently one individual on Tumblr expressing his own opinion, which, by the way, was not celebrating her murder, just for the record. But apparently this non-MRA on Tumblr is reason to believe that all MRAs everywhere are celebrating a woman's murder. Yeah, that's some really good journalism right there. Some really top quality journalism. This, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg. These are just some of the crazy fucking claims which stick in my mind out of the hundreds that I've debunked. But I gotta say, I don't think any has come so close to jumping the shark as an article I read last night. And it still has me scratching my head wondering how this particular young woman could have come to these conclusions. It's just so bizarre and strange. I just had to make a video on it. So the young aspiring journalist in question is one Laura Berlinsky-Schine. And apparently she wants to be a journalist. She's had some articles published here and there. If this particular article I'm going to be looking at, though, is any indication, I think she really should consider doing another job, because her level of research is quite baffling. Now, normally, the level of research in these feminist articles about the men's rights movement are pretty fucking bad. Sometimes it's due to laziness, other times it's due to outright lies. Often it's just incompetence and people making up things based on assumptions. But this one truly is baffling, and I honestly don't know how she came to the conclusions that she did. So anyway, let's have a look at a small section of this article. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. There's a link to it below if you want to read it. It is rather short. and it's called Anti-Feminism, A Brief History. So I want to look at the bit about men's rights activists. Now, you'll see the section I've got on the screen here, there's bits which have been blacked out, and that's because I don't want to spoil the surprises which are in store for you. They're really quite special, and I want to dissect it one bit at a time without spoilers. So the first bit reads, "Today the feminist movement continues to face backlash from opponents, men's rights activists, who branched off from the men's liberation movement, have seen an upsurge as of late, touting messages against modern feminism and claiming that women's empowerment belittles men." Yeah, we don't actually claim that. That would be a straw man, Laura, just so you know. What we try to do is to bring awareness to men's issues. And what we get in response is lies and misinformation spread about us by people like you. And that's just one of the reasons we have an issue with feminist ideology. The other one being, well, one of the other reasons being that you tend to blame everything on men, including all of men's issues, as opposed to blaming society in general. If a man does something wrong, it's because he's a man. If a woman does something wrong, it's because of a man somewhere, somehow influenced her or forced her in some way or turned her into a victim somehow. So it's not really her fault, it's the fault of men. If a woman has a problem, well, that's the fault of men. But if a man has a problem, well, that's the fault of men as well. It's a toxic ideology, which is extremely bigoted and very narrow-minded and tends to distort reality quite a bit. So that's why we have a problem with feminism, not because it's empowering women. In fact, I would argue it's doing the exact opposite. But let's continue, because we haven't got to the good bits yet. Now, she goes on to say, there are several prominent men's rights activist groups in existence today. Now, note the word prominent. So these must be the most known and most popular men's rights groups. That would be a safe assumption, correct? Now, let's start with the one that feminist journalists like her always seem to make, and that's men going their own way. This really isn't a surprise. It's incorrect, but it's not really jumping the shark because it's so fucking common coming from people like this. Don't worry, the good stuff's still coming. Now, the next one is actually a men's rights group. It's India's Save Indian Family Foundation. And this is actually a men's rights group, amazingly. And they do activism about things like male suicide, and they're trying to get the laws in India changed so they're more gender neutral. Now, remember that, because that's important for a bit later. Now, the interesting thing about her using the Save Indian Family Foundation as an example of MRAs is the very next line is, the alt-right movement has also upheld the patriarchy as a central value. It's interesting because MRAs are always falsely associated with the alt-right and white supremacy, so it's interesting that she's using an Indian MRA group, which tend to be ignored by people making those arguments. Now, to be fair, she hasn't referred to us as white supremacists, which is quite a surprise, actually. That tends to be typical these days. Now, I have to question whether the Save Indian Family Foundation is a prominent MRA group. Maybe they are in India, but looking at their webpage, I would speculate that they're fairly grassroots. And there are quite a few men's rights groups in India. Once again, this is never mentioned by those trying to make the white supremacist argument, strangely. So if the Save Indian Family Foundation isn't a prominent group, then what are some prominent men's rights groups? Well, you could say A Voice for Men, You could say the National Coalition for Men. You could say Justice for Men and Boys in the UK. You could say Cafe in Canada. Now, I know Cafe doesn't identify as a men's rights group, but they are focused on men's issues and men's rights. You could also name a lot of smaller grassroots organisations like Men's Rights Australia, and there are similar organisations right across the world. So if she is going to be listing some of the prominent men's rights groups, you would expect at least one or two of them in the list. I would be expecting AVFM to be there somewhere, but it's not. In fact, none of those groups I mentioned are there anywhere, strangely. Okay, so at this point you're thinking she's probably going to do what feminists like this always do when they write an article about the men's rights movement, and that is falsely associate us with pickup artists or whatever, right? So you would expect maybe a Roosh V or Return of Kings or a Red Pill Reddit. And you would be wrong if you guessed any of those. She doesn't refer to any of them, strangely. I say strangely because it's so common, not because it's accurate, of course. So I think I've built up the suspense enough, so let's have an actual look at the first of these three prominent men's rights groups that she mentions. Now, the first one is called the Independent Women's Forum. I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. The Independent Women's Forum. So, without even looking at this group, I would suspect that it would be a forum about women who happen to be independent. That's what the name would suggest, which would be a very strange name for a men's rights group. But you know what? We can't judge a book by its cover, and quite possibly the Independent Women's Forum is a forum about men's rights. So let's go have a look and see what the Independent Women's Forum actually is. So the Independent Women's Forum's mission is to improve the lives of Americans by increasing the number of women who value free markets and personal liberty. Yeah, those are very common MRA talking points, aren't they? Now, to be 100% fair, I did a search for men's rights on their website and found a handful of articles referring to the men's rights movement. So let's have a quick look at them. So there's two articles about Helen Smith, who's a feminist, who wrote a book called The War on Men. There is an article about the Southern Poverty Law Centre criticising Christina Hoff Sommers, feminist Christina Hoff Sommers, for apparently giving respectability to the men's rights movement or men's rights concerns. There is an article about Lacey Green dating Chris Ray Gunn, and this is another example of shoddy journalism. It refers to Chris Ray Gunn being famous for his men's rights rallying against exactly the kind of dutiful feminist and social justice warrior that Lacey Green used to be. Yeah, Chris Ray Gunn does not rally for men's rights. He is not a men's rights activist. There's an article criticising a UK university for cancelling an International Men's Day event about male suicide. This was covered by both left-wing and right-wing publications in England, for the record. And then there was an article criticising a feminist professor, and where men's rights is mentioned is in a quote from the professor, who criticises one of her students for supposedly using a men's rights group as a citation. Now, the quote does have a citation, but not to the citation used by the student, but to a Mother Jones article about the men's rights movement. So we can't actually look up the student citation to see, first of all, if it was a men's rights group, and second of all, whether the claim was actually correct or not. Instead, what we get is a misleading article from Mother Jones, which realistically is nothing more than a hit piece on the men's rights movement. If you're talking about someone using a citation from a men's rights website, then link to that citation. Don't link to another article about the men's rights movement, because all you're doing is trying to poison the well. So it would seem that they do talk about men's rights, but only when there's a story in the media and they cover it as well. I mean, this makes them as much of a men's rights website as, say, Huffington Post or Jezebel. I did, however, find that they have a regular publication called Modern Feminist. And what they do in this publication is they spotlight a woman who is successful and, I guess, independent. Now, I'm guessing what they've done is they're trying to rebrand the term feminist, which is why they're using the term modern feminist, because in this list of women is one Margaret Thatcher. And to my knowledge, she never called herself a feminist. In fact, from memory, I think she would be quite insulted by the term. So, like I said, I'm guessing that they're trying to separate this form of feminism, because, we don't have enough versions of feminism, why not have another? But I guess they're trying to separate their version of feminism from the social justice intersectionality crowd. So this is modern feminism as opposed to, all the other forms or something. I don't know. Maybe this is a form for independent, strong women or something. Now, to be 100% fair, I haven't looked into this modern feminism thing in great detail, and the reason why is because that's not the subject of this video. What I'm concerned about is whether this is a men's rights group, a prominent men's rights group. And considering they've got a publication called Modern Feminism, and they focus exclusively on women, I'm guessing they're not a men's rights group. I mean, call me crazy. Call me crazy for thinking that. But a organisation focused entirely on independent, strong women, and who doesn't talk about any men's issues whatsoever, unless it's somehow in relationship to feminism and is a story in the news. Yeah, it's kind of baffling how anyone could think that they're a men's rights group. Like I said, I just find this particular group used as a prominent MRA group to be astounding. What was Laura Berlinsky-Schine thinking? What was going through her head when she decided that this particular group, which focuses exclusively on women's issues, or strong independent women, is somehow an MRA group? Staggering. It really is. But it gets better. If you thought that one was bewildering, wait until you see the next one. She hasn't jumped the shark yet. She was just revving her motor a bit. She's just lining up with the ramp, and now she's about to take off. Because the next one is the Concerned Women of America, or CWA for short. Now, you may be thinking, but Bane, maybe the Concerned Women of America are really just concerned about men's issues. And that's possible. So let's go have a look and see what the Concerned Women of America are really concerned about. I've got a feeling it's not men's issues. The Concerned Women of America is built on prayer and action. Oh, okay. We are the nation's largest public policy women's organisation with a rich history of over 3 decades of helping our members across the country bring biblical principles into all levels of public policy. Yeah, strangely, this group is sounding even less like a men's rights group than the previous one. Now, they have 7 core issues, so let's have a look at the 7 core issues and see if any of them are men's rights related. You would think that a prominent MRA website or organisation would have at least some men's rights issues in their 7 core issues, right? They would have to. So the first one is the sanctity of life. In other words, they're anti-abortion. Number 2 is defence of family. In other words, they believe that marriage is only between men and women. So they're against gay marriage. The third one is education, and by that they mean that parents should have authority over the educational system. I would speculate that maybe that has something to do with prayer in school or getting rid of evolution from science classes, if I was to speculate, that is. Religious liberty. It says here, CWA supports the God-given rights of individuals in the United States and other nations to pray, worship, and express their beliefs without fear of discrimination or prosecution. I thought you already had that in America, but anyway. Now, I'm an atheist, as you should all know, but I've got to say, as that is written there, I would support that. I think that people should be able to believe in whatever god or goddesses or gods or whatever they want to. That's their business and none of mine. Except when they try to force it down my throat, or force it down the throat of others, or try to influence the government with it. That's when it goes from being their right to violating other people's rights. So once again, I would speculate, based on previous groups that I've seen, that maybe when they talk about giving people the right to pray and worship and express their beliefs without fear, that once again they're talking about prayer in school. And I happen to be a firm believer that there should be a separation between church and state. More than happy for you to go to church and pray, or pray in your home, or even pray in a public place if you want, but if it's a government-run institution, it shouldn't be in bed with a particular religion. Now, I'm sure this group wouldn't like it if there was prayer in school and that prayer was Islamic prayer, for example, and the Christians in that school were forced to pray to Allah. I'm pretty sure they would have a problem with that, and that's my problem when Christians do the same thing. Anyway, moving on to the next one. National sovereignty, which seems to be keeping the United Nations out of America's business. And number 6 is sexual exploitation. CWA endeavours to fight all pornography, obscenity, prostitution and sex slavery. And the last one is support for Israel. Okay, so none of these are men's rights issues. Surprisingly, I'm absolutely shocked. I'm astounded that this prominent MRA organisation would be focusing on absolutely no men's rights issues. How bizarre, how strange. Now, I guess I should say that there would be individual MRAs who have a variety of stances on all these issues. For example, I'm sure there are MRAs who are pro-Israel, and others who are pro-Palestine, and others who don't give a shit either way. You could say the same about abortion and any of the other topics brought up here. There would be some people who are pro-choice, some who are pro-life, and some who just don't care. But the point is, none of these are men's rights issues. But just to be 100% sure, I did a search for men's rights, and look what I got. I got women's rights, and women's rights, and women's rights, and women's rights yet again. So it's strange, it's bizarre that this prominent MRA group would be focusing on religion and women's rights. It's strange. It's bizarre. But once again, I have to ask the question, what the fuck was Laura Berlinsky-Schine thinking? What the fuck was going through her mind when she decided that this is a prominent men's rights group? How in hell could you come to the conclusion that this is an MRA group in any fucking way? It's beyond me. It's just fucking bizarre. Clearly, absolutely no fucking research done whatsoever. Not the slightest bit of research or critical thinking in any fucking possible way. This, folks, is the future of journalism. I have no doubt in a few years she'll be writing articles for Jezebel, BuzzFeed and Huffington Post. Just to name a few outlets who I'm sure would jump at the chance of hiring a illogical hack who can't do any research. But there is one more prominent MRA group that we should discuss, and that one is the Eagle Forum, in brackets, founded by Phyllis Schlafly.
The national chairman of the movement to stop ERA is Mrs. Phyllis Schlafly, who is here today and raring to go. Dr. Ann Scott is Vice President for Legislation for the National Organization of Women. The proposed constitutional amendment, passed overwhelmingly by the Senate and the House, holds that, quote, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. That doesn't sound particularly subversive, and I would therefore like to begin by asking Mrs. Schlafly to state her principal objection to ERA.
Well, it's the very innocuous wording of the amendment that is the reason why many people didn't realize in the beginning what unfortunate consequences it would have. But fortunately, the amending process calls for a full-blown debate in the state legislatures around the country, and this is where we find out some of the things that were not originally realized by many people who voted for it. We find, as we look into the matter, that ERA won't give women anything which they haven't already got or have a way of getting. But on the other hand, it will take away from women some of the most important rights and benefits and exemptions we now have.
What would be an example of that?
Well, a great glaring example on which there's full agreement between both the proponents and the opponents is the matter of the draft. Women are exempt from the draft. Selective service says only young men of age 18 have to register. But the Equal Rights Amendment will positively make women subject to the draft and on an equal basis with men. Nor could you have a system whereby the women would get all the nice, easy desk jobs and the men get all the fighting jobs. It would have to be equal across the board, in combat, on warships, and all up and down the line.
Do you agree?
So Phyllis Schlafly was one of the main opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment. And the reason why is because she wanted to keep female privilege. It's really that simple. In the areas where females have special advantage under the law, she wanted to keep that. Now, this goes against the very principles of the men's rights movement. One of our founding principles is equality for both men and women, but also equal responsibility. You can't have an equal and just society when you have special privileges and advantages under the law for certain groups, and special requirements and restrictions or disadvantages for other groups. And once again, the draft in America is a perfect example of this. It would be better to get rid of the draft altogether, but if you're going to have the draft, then it should be for everyone who is able-bodied and can meet the requirements, regardless of whether they're male or female, or straight or gay, or white or black, or whatever. It should be across the board. It shouldn't be for one group and another group gets a special pass based on their gender. That's not equal. But you know what? Don't take my word for it. Let's have a look at an actual prominent men's rights website. One of the ones that Laura didn't mention for some strange reason. and see what they've got to say about this particular topic. So this is an article written by Paul Elam from 2013, and it's called Entering a New ERA. And he says the Equal Rights Amendment, written in 1923, is a proposal to make freedom from discrimination based on sex a matter of constitutional law in the United States. Its wording is as clear as it is brief. Section 1. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. Section 2. The Congress shall have the power to enforce, by appropriate legislation, the provisions of this article. Section 3. This amendment shall take effect 2 years after the date of ratification. Paul goes on to say, after discussion with the editorial staff of this website, we have agreed that this proposed amendment, precisely as it is worded above, is in the interest of all citizens. It is our considered opinion that resistance to this amendment primarily stems from the desire to maintain the status quo of the disposability of men and boys. And indeed, we find that the activism that prevented this previous success stemmed from political conservatives like Phyllis Schlafly, who successfully campaigned to keep men in deadly servitude to their culture for the benefit and enjoyment of women. With that in mind, we issue our support to the Equal Rights Amendment and pledge our activism to push for ratification. We also challenge all humans or so-called equal rights organisations to support this with their own redoubled efforts to demand ratification, as failure to do so will be identified as the supreme hypocrisy of this age. I think that is pretty fucking clear. But that's not the only mention of Phyllis Schlafly on A Voice for Men. They also shared a video from Barbarossa, where Barbarossa is extremely critical of Phyllis Schlafly. The video is called Phyllis Schlafly Embraces Hypergamy and Male Disposability. Yeah, it's pretty clear it's a negative video. And then there was an article on AVFM from Harry Crotch. Now, in case you don't know who Harry Crotch is, he is the president of the National Coalition for Men. So this one article actually represents two actual prominent men's rights organisations. Firstly, because it's published on A Voice for Men, and second of all, because it's written by the president of the National Coalition for Men. And once again, it is critical of Schlafly and her opposition to the ERA. So I hate to tell you this, Laura, but we stand in total opposition to Phyllis Schlafly and her ideals. So claiming that the Eagle Forum is a prominent men's rights website or organisation is fucking ludicrous. It's like claiming that the Nation of Islam is part of the KKK. But considering your level of research, Laura, you probably think those two organisations are the same. Now, some of you at this point may be saying, but bang, just because Phyllis Schlafly started the Eagle Forum doesn't mean that it necessarily agrees with everything she says, and maybe it's still a men's rights organisation anyway. Well, if you're thinking that, you would be wrong. They most definitely support every single fucking thing that Phyllis Schlafly has ever said or done, and they most definitely support her opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, to be 100% fair, they do seem to occasionally talk about fathers' rights and injustice in the family court. That is the closest they come to actually supporting any type of men's rights. However, their opposition to the ERA is a much more important thing. Occasionally mentioning that the family courts are fucked really doesn't make up for promoting female privilege and advantage. I mean, they even go as far as to say all other laws that provide preferential treatment for women. Once again, let me stress, if you're giving one group preferential treatment under the law, that's not equality. And just in case you're confused, Laura, MRAs do not want preferential treatment for men. We want equal treatment. And there are a number of areas where men don't get that. So I find Laura Berlinsky-Schine's level of research just to be astonishing. Did she actually look into these organisations? I have to ask that question. I mean, the name of some of them should be a dead giveaway. The Independent Women's Forum. That should, just the name alone should be ringing alarm bells. Especially considering the sentence before Laura mentions the Independent Women's Forum. She says that MRAs believe that empowering women belittles men. And then she includes a website which is about female empowerment and claims it's an MRA website. It's astounding, really, what was going through her head. It's like a total lack of any fucking logical thought whatsoever. I just find it baffling. I really do. So I sent Laura a very polite tweet asking if she could explain why she thinks these organisations could somehow possibly be men's rights organisations. And as of yet, I have received no reply. Now, to give her credit, she hasn't blocked me either. I've found in previous experiences when you've asked a feminist journalist politely to explain something, their standard response is simply to block you and ignore you, assuming that you are a troll or something. Yeah. Remember, folks, disagreement with a feminist means that you're a troll. Even if they get all their facts wrong, it's still your fault, somehow. That's the way the patriarchy works. So I haven't received a response from Laura, and I don't suspect I will. But I had to know. I had to know how she could come to these insane conclusions. Clearly, she hasn't looked at these organisations, but somehow she has come to the conclusion that they're MRA organisations. So I wondered if she got their name from a list somewhere, you know, some website or something which has listed these falsely as MRA organisations, and she's just cut and paste them into her article. So what I did is I did a Google search for the Independent Women's Forum and the Concerned Women of America, because I figured if she did get this from a list, searching for those two names should show up the list, right? And I found something very interesting. It seems the extent of Laura's research was the Wikipedia anti-feminism page. Now, if we look under organisations, we find the Eagle Forum, the Save Indian Family Foundation, the Concerned Women of America, and the Independent Women's Forum. And then right at the end it says the alt-right movement is anti-feminist. Yeah, maybe that's just a coincidence. Now, I should point out that this is the Wikipedia anti-feminism page, not the Wikipedia men's rights page. And nowhere does this anti-feminism page on Wikipedia claim that any of these organisations are men's rights organisations. Not even the Save Indian Family Foundation, which actually is an MRA organisation. So Laura has just read Wikipedia and concluded without any actual research whatsoever that these organisations must be prominent men's rights organisations. Well done, Laura. Well done. That is an amazing piece of journalism you've done there. With research skills like this, you are bound to go far. Unfortunately. So I just finished watching that episode, going through it and making sure there's no mistakes and doing overlays and all that other stuff. And I have to say that I think I may have been a little bit harsh on Laura. I think if I remember correctly, I think I called her a hack and said she can't use logic or something like that. I think that's incredibly unfair. She's obviously just a young journalist just learning the trade, and I figured to make it up to her, I would give her a little bit of advice to help her on her way as a journalist, a future journalist. Because I imagine she'll be writing articles about her period on BuzzFeed anytime soon. So now hopefully Laura will take this advice to heart and realise I have nothing but the best intentions with it. So what I thought I would do is I thought I'd give Laura a list of organisations which aren't men's rights organisations, just in case sometime in the future she's writing another article about the men's rights movement and, you know, she comes across one of these organisations she knows, because I've explained to her that these organisations have nothing to do with the men's rights movement. Now, the first one is the Nation of Islam. Now, it is true that the Nation of Islam does include men, but that doesn't make them a men's rights organisation. They are a Islamic organisation, you could probably tell by the name, and they're a pro-black organisation, but they don't advocate for men's rights. The next one I should probably explain is the Metal Roofing Association. Now, this one may be a little bit confusing for you, Laura, because it's got the same initials as men's rights activist. They both have MRA in it. But one is a group of people which advocate for men and boys and their human rights, and the other one is an association which is concerned with metal roofing. So those are two different things. There's no overlap, just so you're sure about that. Now, the next one on the list is the Illuminati. Now, take a second, Laura, because I don't want you to confuse this with the patriarchy. Now, they do have a lot of things in common. They're both fictitious organisations which are promoted by lunatic conspiracy theorists, but neither one advocate for the rights of men. So just to go over that again, the Illuminati doesn't advocate for the rights of men, and second of all, they're not a real organisation. Okay, so just so you understand that. I hope you're taking notes. So now, since we're talking about fictional organisations, I figured I would mention the Klingons. Now, the Klingons do not advocate for men's rights. They might advocate for Klingon rights, but they don't advocate for male human rights. However, you could speculate that maybe the Borg has a lot in common with feminism, but that's another video. And lastly, just up the road from my place, there's a park, and in that park there is a very large oak tree. Now, that oak tree is not a men's rights organisation. Just so you're sure, Laura, because I know this is confusing for you. I know it's complex, and I know, you find research a little bit difficult, so we'll take it slowly, and hopefully you'll understand that oak tree in the park is not a men's rights organisation. Although it might be part of the pickup artist community, I'm not sure.